Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 500,000 times in over 145 countries and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage.
This is episode 207 of the Australian Hiker Podcast. In this week's episode, we talk about the Three Capes Track, expectations versus reality. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Now, this is the third and final podcast in this series of 3 on the Tasmanian Three Capes Track. In this episode, we compare our pre-trip expectations to the reality of the journey and based on our experience, make recommendations as how to get the best out of this trip. We recommend that as you listen to this episode, you follow along on the written review to have a look at the images and the resources that are available. We hope you enjoy. First up, I normally we leave this to the end, but from my perspective, the Three Capes Track in Tasmania was a real surprise to us. We expected to enjoy it, probably not as much as we actually ended up doing. Previously, my attitude has always been that there's too many hiking trails around to repeat a trail a second time. And the exception for me has been the Larapinta Trail, which I want to go back and do a second time. But coming away from this trip, I've come away with the same opinion that I'd like to go back and do the Three Capes Track again. It was just such a good track and we had such a good time.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It was lots of things that I think I wasn't expecting, and, we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But it is a really, really great experience. It's a great track, and it has so much to offer everyone.
So we're going to go through and talk about what our expectations were before the trip, having never set foot on the trail before, and how we actually found the trip now we've done it. Now, first up, let's talk about track fees. As a government-constructed and government-run track, this is, I think, is the dearest track in Australia at $495 per adult. And even children 3 years old to 17 or concession card holders are still $396 per person at the time of this podcast. So it's not a cheap track. I've always been aware of the pricing of this track, and I've certainly talked to a number of people who said, oh, no, it's too expensive, it's not going to be worth it. But I suppose the consideration here is the Tasmanian government spent approximately $25 million on building and constructing this trail. And when you actually stay in the huts and you see what's on offer and what's provided as part of this trip, it really is value for money.
Yeah, I think there's something else a bit more fundamental here, because the track is full up, all the time. So the judgment about value for money is being made by those who are paying the money and coming away with an experience and, coming away with a positive view. So I think I don't think it's about repaying the government for the investment. I think it's about appreciating, what the market will bear. And, like anything, this is a commercial venture.
So I think one thing you tend not to realise with this trip is you're not just paying track fees. What you're paying for is a boat ride from Port Arthur through to the trailhead at Denman's Beach. And it's not just a boat ride across the bay.
It would be a pretty short boat ride if they just did that, but you get a tour,
Yeah, we spent basically an hour from leaving Port Arthur to getting across the bay. It took us an hour, because we went all the way along the bay, out into open ocean, along some of the ocean cliffs, had a look around, and then came back to the trailhead. And then that took us an hour, and it was an enjoyable trip.
I think it might have taken a little bit longer if the sea was a bit bit calmer, a bit more pleasant. But we got a nature session, we got a geology session, we got a climate session. We got all sorts of information out of that. We had a history lesson as well.
And I must admit, I wasn't expecting that. I just didn't think, I just thought, okay, you get on the ferry or the I call it a ferry, but it's just a boat. You get on the boat across the bay, and I thought that was the extent of it. In addition, you get access to Port Arthur, and that provides a number of different services. When we got to Port Arthur, we checked in at the ranger's office, which is on the bottom floor. We got our passes. We were able to leave our town bag in a gear storage room there, so we didn't have to worry about what do we do with our excess luggage or extra luggage. We got access to go and have a look at Port Arthur, and we spent a couple of hours doing that. And we also, as part of this, we get access to Port Arthur for 2 years. Now, whether I'm necessarily going to go back to Port Arthur in the next 6 to 8 months, I don't think so. But 2 years, that's not unrealistic. So, and it's an easy site where you could easily spend the entire day there. Or you could, if you had your own vehicle or you're doing a bit of travelling around, you could revisit the site again after you've actually done the hike.
Yeah, just on the Port Arthur, the staff at Port Arthur and in the Three Capes Track office, they're very friendly. You obviously stand out as a hiker. They like the hikers, and they're welcoming and make the experience. So you're not just another tourist. That's the other thing, I think.
Now, I've got a heritage background, and I must admit I've known about Port Arthur for years but never actually been there. So it was really a good experience. And again, we could quite easily go back there and spend another half day there without too much problem. One of the things that I was aware of and is talked about on the Three Capes website is that because you're on a large peninsula and you're surrounded by ocean on three sides, the climate is very different. Now, the maximum temperatures during summertime, maximum and minimum temperatures around about 16 to 19 degrees, and the wintertime is 10 to 12 degrees. So it's the sort of thing that it's not one of those things like the overland track where you're going to get snowed on in the middle of winter. Even in wintertime on this walk, it's cool, but it's not not freezing cold like you expect in the central tablelands of Tasmania itself.
Yeah, but because you're so exposed, it is windy. There are sheltered parts, but in winter you'd expect cold winds, and you'd expect winds all year round, and we certainly got winds, and you'd expect rain all year round.
The other thing that I didn't really realise in this, yes, I realised it was going to be a coastal environment, but I had an expectation that it was going to look like Tasmania, and looking like
I don't know what that means.
Well, looking like the overland track did, that sort of environment and vegetation. And while we had some areas of that, it very much was a coastal area. And I made the comment in some of our posts in a previous podcast that it's a bit like walking through coastal New South Wales. It is, but it isn't.
It's better.
Yeah, no, ticks is probably a good thing there. It's got its own unique character that, you think, okay, this is sort of New South Wales, but not quite. But it was a really nice environment to walk through.
Yeah, it was. And, quite pleasant, and even if you saw nothing along the way, there were lots of sections that were just a really nice part of the world to hike through.
Now, the next thing that I misinterpreted on this walk, and again, this is through, I just had an expectation that because we were walking along cliff tops, for some reason I expected this walk to be relatively flattish.
It's Tasmania.
It's Tasmania. It is Tasmania. I don't think Tasmania does flat very well. If you're following along and looking at the write-up of this trail at the same time, we've got a little image showing the change in altitude over the 4 days. And, certainly the highest peak is under 600 metres, but really you're starting off, you're progressively making your way upwards. You've got a couple of tall peaks on the second day. You've got a really tall peak on the last day on the trail, and then you start making your way down. But it is not a flat trail. Now, my comment here was this trail has been designed to be walked in one direction. It's not like the overland track where if you do it off-season you can walk in both directions. This one, you start at Denman's Cove and you finish at Fortescue Bay, and that's the way this walk is run year-round. They've designed and built the trail in that way. So when we climbed up Arthur's Peak in the second day, it was a series of switchbacks and steps. On the first day, from leaving the beach to heading up to Monroe Hut, we had a series of steps, and there were a lot of steps that just went up and up and up.
Yeah, I didn't expect as many steps, and I think I've discovered that in Tassie you don't sort of switch back your way up a mountain. You actually just go up and then you go down, and you use steps. And there were rock steps, which, are pretty tough given that they're usually uneven, different heights and so on. There were stone steps, which is, there were flights of stone steps that have been created by, a stonemason, and they're just works of art in the middle of nowhere. And then there are steps that are essentially bounded by timber with some dirt or granite infill. So lots of steps, lots of different types of steps. But I think also once you got into it, it didn't seem as tough on your feet as well. So while the steps were tough on your knees and tough on your legs, it was pretty good for your feet.
Now, going back to the trailhead on this track, we were dropped off by the boat, and it was a bit funny in some respects because it was a really low tide. They couldn't get as close to the beach as they normally do. So they suggested we take our shoes and socks off because we had to wade through about 40 centimetres of water for probably around about 40 metres or so just to get onto the beach. So we ended up sitting there just letting our feet dry and brushing the sand off before we actually started walking. The boat itself is pretty good. The thing that really sort of stuck with me here was there really are no trail markers on this track. If you think of just about any other track or trail you do that's multiple days, they tend to have little arrows or little directional signs saying, turn here, go here. There are a few on this track, but there's really no directional signage. And there's probably a good reason for that is it's if you get lost on this track, you're walking with your eyes closed, basically. It's a clearly defined track.
Well, I think you're bush bashing. If you can't find the track, then you're trying to go cross country.
Yeah, so it's a sort of track where you don't need to know how to navigate. I had what used to be called the Guidebook app, which is now called Far Out, and the only time I ever got it out to have a look at it was more about seeing what their change in altitude was rather than for a navigation perspective. There are a few signs along there, mainly things like cliff warning signs. On day 3, we had some directional signs, but in most cases it was more about the artwork along the trail rather than the signage.
And don't forget the helicopter warning signs. Stop here if you hear a helicopter. It's like, it's in some of those places I wasn't sure where the helicopter was going to go, but
we think possibly this is just a bit of a hangover from construction, or whether they need to do maintenance, they'll actually go through and drop a helicopter in and warn people just in case,
or drop gear in.
Yeah. One thing with this track, one of the reasons for so much boardwalk is trying to prevent the spread of root rot in some areas. So there are a couple of foot cleaning stations, and we've got show images of that being used in the
boot cleaning.
Yeah, boot cleaning stations, just to disinfect anything in the bottom of your feet or the bottom of your shoes. And yeah, fairly easy to get used to. Something I haven't seen since I hiked the Bibbulmun track in Western Australia. Talking about things like wildlife or flora and fauna, wildlife was a bit of a surprise on this one. You know, there wasn't what I'd consider to be a lot of wildlife. There was some there, but I've certainly done trails that have had much more animals roaming around. But without a doubt, I saw more echidnas on this track than I think just about every other track that I've ever done.
And they're so cute, and they're these, you know, really sort of light brown, blondie colour, very unusual, and just completely unfazed by the hikers. So, you know, we didn't have to look hard for these echidnas. They were quite literally on the side of the track doing their thing and didn't take much notice of us.
We actually had one on the last day that was pretty much in the middle of the track. It obviously found a good cache of insects or ants because it was digging away and had about 6 or 7 hikers around it with their cameras and their phones taking photos, and it just didn't care. It was just so focused on eating, it just ignored the hikers. So, yeah, all the echidnas we saw were basically feeding on the edge of the trail or on the trail. And obviously it's a bit easier for them because they don't have to dig through bush. But yeah, if you want to see echidnas, I think this is the track for it. We had some Bennett's wallabies were probably the most common of the kangaroo family, and particularly at the third hut where we had a male, a female, and a joey there, and it was quite funny to watch. They looked like they were sleeping underneath the decking, and we're standing there on the decking, and Mum comes out and has a look around and hops off. The joey comes out, and then all of a sudden
makes the weirdest sound.
Yeah, the Mum comes back and shoos the joey back underneath the decking, and then takes a swipe at the male. It was all, and I know we're not supposed to associate human emotions to animals, but it was almost like, "What are you doing? You're supposed to keep control of this thing."
Yeah.
So you
were in charge, and you failed.
But yeah, they're cute. We saw a little potteroo at one stage. Nighttime, I saw a possum at the base of the trees and a reasonable number of birds. Blue-tongued lizard and other people on the track saw tiger snakes as well. But again, we tended to start a bit earlier and finish a bit earlier than most people, and I think we sort of beat the snakes out onto the track who were looking at sunning themselves.
Yes, I think it was a bit warmer when they were eyeing off the tiger snakes.
Plant-wise, again, we weren't in the peak wildflower season, but there was so much there. We came across orchids, lots of banksias. There were things just flowering everywhere. There was enough to keep me happy as a horticulturalist, and I was taking quite a lot of photos. So it doesn't seem to matter what time of the year it is. I'm guessing middle of winter there might not be so much there. But certainly, there was enough to keep people happy, and there was enough to go through and see. Accommodation and facilities-wise, there are 3 huts along the trail. There's Surveyor Hut, which is the first one, Monroe Hut, which is the second, and Retakuna, which is the third hut. They're all built around the same sort of design, but they take advantage of the landscape that they're in.
Yeah, so the configuration is slightly different. In one, at Surveyor's, the individual huts are more in a line, whereas at Retakuna they're kind of two blocks of huts, but still connected. So just taking advantage of the different environment to make it as attractive as possible, I guess.
And I think for us, probably our favourite would have been Monroe Hut, which was the second day where we stayed. And I think partly because that was on towards the edge of a cliff. It was well back, but it was towards the edge of a cliff, so you were getting ocean views, and there was this nice lookout virtually as soon as you arrived. Yeah,
you walked onto a deck to make your way into the camp, and it was just this amazing view, and lots of people just, grabbed a chair or grabbed a seat and just relaxed looking out into the ocean.
There's 2 kitchens at each of the huts, in fact, Monroe Hut's slightly different, but with the other huts, there's 2 little kitchen areas, so people will often congregate to one or the other. There's tables, there's seating cubes, there's a kitchen area with a gas stove, there's solar lighting, and there's also USB charging points to charge your phone, to charge your camera, whatever it is you need to charge. Now, this seems a bit of a luxury, but it's something that's becoming more and more common on tracks these days, and particularly because we still are in a period we still are feeling the impacts of the pandemic, where Parks Tasmania wanted us to keep our phones on at all time, so if they needed to contact us, they could do. But with the USB charging stations there, it meant that we could have fully charged phones all the way through. Having said that, though, I still carried a power bank just to recharge. It just made things a bit more convenient, which means I could charge at night time rather than having to go and collect the phone from the kitchen area.
Well, the other thing I noticed was charging with the power bank is much faster than plugging it into a wall.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's pretty powerful.
The kitchens also have pellet heaters. We used that on one of the days where we had a bit of rain. It was a bit cold. But otherwise, they really are well set out. They're well designed. They look really good.
Yeah, and just while we're still talking about the huts and we were talking about the things that you get, at each of the huts there's a host ranger, and the host ranger is there to guide, to provide a briefing. They also do all the cleaning. They've got the good jobs. And so, you're not rocking up and the camp is completely empty. You've got somebody who's a caretaker essentially for each of the sites.
Sleeping-wise, there are a number of cabins, and I think there was 9 cabins in each of the locations, and they were numbered 1 to 9. The cabins varied. The cabin we stayed in was actually cabin number 1, and that was our allocated cabin for the 3 huts. So we knew when we turned up to Monroe and Redacuna, we were staying in hut 1, which made things really easy.
Yeah, and I like that because the thing I'm not a fan of when you're on a trail where everyone's heading in the same direction and you need to stay in huts is that it drives this, I've got to leave and I've got to get to the next campsite as fast as I possibly can to grab the best posse. So that took the pressure off. We knew that we were in hut number 1 and it slept 8 people. There were only 4 in it, so Tim and I and another couple. We'd managed to organise ourselves based on the first day, and that followed through. So they had one end and we had the other end, and it worked out quite well, and there was no rushing to find the best bunk.
Because of the pandemic, they have reduced the numbers. Instead of having 48 people potentially staying there at the huts, they had a maximum of 36, and we were 3 short on our group of people. One of the families that were with us was waiting for a family to come across from Western Australia, and they could get out of Western Australia. They were worried about getting back again. So that ended up freeing up 3 spaces. But it was really quite enjoyable. The bunk rooms are basic. They've got good thick mattresses. They're bunks, but they're protected. They're sheltered. You don't feel like you're freezing to death. And you've got good big overhangs outside. So even if it's raining, you're not going to get saturated as you walk outside. Yeah,
and there are enough benches and enough pegs to hang gear on both inside and outside each of the huts. So, it means that you can keep things reasonably tidy. You don't have to have everything on your bunk or under your bunk.
The toilets, as is pretty typical in Tasmania, are composting toilets, and they're actually sort of almost a 2-story affair where you walk up the stairs to go to the toilets, and that's because they take all waste out of the park, and there's a series of pods which they remove all the waste from and swap over, and then at some point a helicopter will come in and take these things away. But plenty of toilet facilities with hand basins and a mirror for shaving, for doing whatever you need to. So they're quite good in that respect. And Monroe Hut had 2 outdoor showers, which were basically tin semicircular sort of affairs that you walked inside. There was a canvas bucket which you lowered and filled up with relatively warm water. I wouldn't say it's hot, but it was pretty warm, and just have a slow shower. It might only last 5 minutes, but it was just nice just to wash all the grime off.
I don't think my shower lasted 5 minutes, Tim. Once you opened that up, it came out.
Mine was much slower. So.
Oh, yeah, I did turn it off a little bit. But, yeah, it was very nice to wash a bit of the grime off. And I must admit I wasn't necessarily going to do it, but got convinced by the enthusiasm by another hiker. So off we went, and I think we were pretty happy we did that.
Now, one of the things they do along this trail is there's a series of artworks that's spread along the trail. And from what the ranger was saying, this was done by the local Indigenous groups, and they really are well done. So in most cases, they're artworks, but they're also seating. So we show a selection of these in the write-up of this trail. And there's one that I'm looking at just at the moment is Guess Who Was Here, and it's got a little picture of a wombat on these square cubed sort of shaped seating that looks like wombat poo. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are very obvious seats. There's one called I think it was Cloud City or Cloud Forest it was, which was almost looked like a series of toadstools, and that's what it was supposed to represent. So there's plenty of things to keep you amused and keep you happy as you go.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about the guidebook. The guidebook has lots of information and is intended for you to use as you're walking along. We tended to do 2 or 3 of these installations, and then at the next one, stop and get out the guidebook and have a bit of a read about what we've seen and what we're going to see next. So it is, as we keep saying, it's an experience. It's not just about walking. It's about slowing down. It's about looking around, and it's about, taking it all in and reflecting.
Okay, so day 1 for us was an introduction to the trail, and if we stopped at day 1, I would have been happy with the experience that we'd had out of that. Day 2 was a couple of peaks that really did tire everybody out. Arthur's Peak and Crescent Mountain were the 2 high points on day 2, which provided some excellent views.
And day 2 was about the views,
yeah.
Definitely. I mean, the art installations were fantastic, but the views were just like nothing you've seen.
And then day 3 was around about Cape Pillar and the Blade. Now, day 3, we had apparently Monroe Hut has the best sunrise views on the trail, and I got up to go to the bathroom just after 4 o'clock, and it was starry and clear skies. Half an hour later, it was raining, so I missed my opportunity to get up and have a look at the sunrise and take photos from the helipad, which is the recommended area. But we had the rain continue on and off for at least half the day, and that tended to drop the temperatures a bit. So we put our rain gear on and headed off to Cape Pillar and the Blade. And one of the things that I was a bit confused about there was I saw all these people coming back the previous day with their full packs and thought, geez, that's a bit weird. But it's not until you realise, or you've done the brief with the ranger, that you realise there's actually a little hut around about 100 metres down the track where you put your main pack and just carry a small day pack.
Yes, and that was very much appreciated because this is to Cape Pillar. It's an out and back walk, and a decent number of kilometres. But the primary reason for that is that you need to get all your gear together and out of the way because this is the crossover point for the track. So like we did on day 2, we arrived at Monroe, and we met some hikers who were leaving Monroe. So they'd been out to Cape Pillar, and they were collecting their packs and they were heading off, and we were coming into Monroe and finishing for the day.
So the walk out to day 1 is 4 kilometres. Day 2 is 11 kilometres with a full pack. Day 3 out to the Blade and Cape Pillar is probably only around about 4 kilometres with a full pack. The rest of the distances with a day pack. The last day back to Fortescue Bay is 14 kilometres. Again, probably about 11 kilometres of that with a full pack. And then you've got the side walk off to Cape Hoy you do just with a day pack. So you're not having to carry a full pack for huge distances on this.
Yeah, and they've really thought about the opportunity to drop packs too, and where the best opportunity is. And so at Monroe, being able to put your pack into the little shed that's at the campsite, and then drop your pack before you go into the walk down and up and down and up and down and up into Cape Hoy, is also a really good spot to drop your pack. You don't want to take your full pack down there.
Now, coming back to day 3 is day 1 you walk into the Surveyor Hut, day 2 you're walking to Monroe Hut, day 3 you're going from Monroe Hut out to the Cape, back to Monroe Hut, and then on to Redacuna Hut. So there's a bit of duplication on the walking there. So it is a good opportunity to drop the pack off. As we said, that we had our rain gear on, and it wasn't heavy rain when we were walking, but it was enough that you would have got saturated if you didn't have it on.
And as usual, as soon as you take it off, it was going to start raining heavily. So it was probably just as easy to leave it on. And for me, I used the rain jacket as a bit of a windbreak as well.
Yeah. Now, the Blade is probably the hero image on the websites, or when you see this, it's a peak that narrows up almost onto a knife edge up to the top, and there's the official stopping point, and then you can go right up the top. We opted not to go right to the top because we got up there and we were having 40 km/h winds, and it's narrow, steep steps. It's very exposed. It's on a very narrow outcrop, and we just kind of went, nah. Yeah.
Got this far, love it, thank you for going.
Having said that, though, the people that were behind us, and probably by around about, I'd say almost an hour, because we did leave just after 6 o'clock. We were up for the sunrise.
We were up for the sunrise and we were ready to go in no time.
So we started walking and had breakfast on the trail. So we that's one of the bonuses of getting up early. We had pretty much we had the whole way out there by ourselves, and it was only when we started coming back that we crossed over with everybody else. But yeah, the Blade was really, really good. And then we continued on to Cape Pillar, which wasn't that far away. It was about a roughly 40-minute return trip all up. And they're really creative in some of the names of these places they have. Our first lookout was Seal Spa. And again, there was artwork in there which was supposed to look like lounging seals, but it provided excellent views to Tasman Island, which was just off the coast with the lighthouse, and back to the Blade. So really good views for that. And that's, I think, the cover image for this podcast and the write-up. Cape Pillar itself, the views were good, but I think Seal Spa was a better option.
And the chasm.
Yeah, and the chasm, which was, I think, what's the chasm? And there's a little detour slightly off track, and it is a very short detour.
Yeah. And you get quite close to the sort of right point, and then you go, the chasm.
Yeah, it's just a gap. It's almost like someone's cut a gap through the rock wall, and there's this chasm dropping down to the ocean a couple of 100 metres below. So It was pretty good. So again, spectacular scenery, spectacular geology. There was one point there where we came across an artwork called Wicked Winds, which looks like a warped chair, but it's designed to look like the vegetation. And we got just past that, and if I had have lifted my foot, I would have been blown over. This gust of wind just came just out of nowhere. And a couple of other people said the same as well. This is obviously the high point in that area. It's where all the wind gets funneled through.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a couple of times, I did mention the wind earlier, that a couple of times, you'd be walking along and you were quite comfortable. You knew the wind was blowing, and then just take one step and you would literally be blown sideways. And then if you took another step, you were back out of that big wind gust. So it was very local and very sudden. So another reason to stay away from the cliff edges. And I think for me, what was a bit of a surprise, and I think it's probably a bit of a point of discussion within the Park Service. What was a surprise was there were no barriers to stop people from falling off cliffs. So, you were being trusted with your own life, essentially. So it was a really interesting one, and it was nice because it didn't interrupt the views. Probably the only point at which there was a rail was at Cape Hoy, and that was, because the end point was right on the edge of a cliff and right on the edge of the drop.
And Cape Hoy is actually a single day walk for tourists coming in from Fortescue Bay.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Now that brings us on to the last day of walking, and that was from Monroe Hut to Fortescue Bay. And I'll step backwards here for a minute. There's two decisions that you really need to make on this walk. On the trip out, you've got an 11:30 boat or a 2 o'clock boat, and really it depends on a couple of things. For us as visitors to Tasmania, we needed to get a bus or hire a car, but we got a bus down there. We wanted to have the opportunity to have a look around Port Arthur, so by getting the later boat, we were able to spend time in Port Arthur, have lunch, and then head across. If you're really into swimming, Denman's Beach is a really nice, secluded sort of beach to swim at. For me, I'm not into swimming in Tasmania. The water's too cold for me. But it was a lovely beach, and a number of hikers did take the opportunity. So if you want to go for a swim, take the earlier boat and take advantage of that. The opposite applies as well. When you get to Fortescue Bay, you need to get a bus back to Port Arthur to then get your connecting point back to Hobart, whether that be a car or another bus. And the bus trip back is part of the trip as well. So for us, we didn't have a choice. We had the 2 o'clock, I think it was, 2:30 bus, and then there was a 4 o'clock bus. Now, which one you choose is going to be up to you. If you want to sleep in, if you're a slow walker, choose the later bus. For us, we didn't have much of a choice on that, and we would have left early anyway. And we got up and we'd left probably by about 6:30, I think it was. And again, we were first ones out of the cabin, and we had the whole trail to ourselves again. So really, that's the second decision point you've got to make on this trail when you're booking.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that the host rangers give you guidance on the hours it takes to do each day. You know the kilometres, but there are key points, particularly on the last day, that you need to be mindful of getting back so you can get the bus that you've been booked on. And I think we found that the timings were pretty good. The timings were reasonably generous. We obviously did it faster because we didn't know that at the time. But when they say you've got 6.5 to 7 hours to do this, it'll take you that long, you can plan that, and you will comfortably, most people will very comfortably do it within that time frame.
So the walk to Cape Hoy from Redacuna was, again, it was a different sort of experience. And the ranger had advised this the day before when she did a briefing, that it was almost what you'd class, or at least part of it is what you'd class as typical Tasmania with temperate rainforests. So walking up the highest peak of the whole trip, But it didn't feel like that because the way the steps were done, the way the switchbacks were done, even though it was the highest peak by a long shot, it just felt like a really comfortable sort of walk and a well set out walk.
Well, we'd also done a bit of climbing by then. We'd probably picked up a bit of height along the way, so we weren't necessarily going from sea level.
No. Once we got towards the top, or in fact, we got up towards the top and we had some spectacular views along the cliff line. And I think in some respects, this was views back towards Cape Pillar. And because the sun was back out again, I think the views on that day were probably the best of the whole trip, at least from my perspective. And it wasn't something that I was expecting.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think they were all pretty spectacular. And every time I stopped and looked around, it was like, my goodness, this is just an amazing landscape. And, if you're into landscape photography, you would have just loved it. Absolutely would have loved it.
So we got to the turn point, and as Jill said, there was a sign there saying from here to Cape Hoy is roughly a 2-hour trip, and you then have a 1-hour trip down to Fortescue Bay. Make sure you've got enough time. For us, we had plenty of time. It took us 1 hour and 40 minutes to get out to Cape Hoy. I think it probably took us 40 minutes to get back to Fortescue Bay. So we did it quite comfortably. We had quite a lot of time to wait.
And more steps down.
And more steps down. So we dropped off our packs. There's just as you go to the turnoff there's a little area on the right which is some seating where you can drop your packs off and just take your day pack out to the Cape itself. There's a warning sign there about the birds, and just like on the overland track, the currawongs that are there know how to undo zips, and if you leave a pocket open, they will get in there, and if there's anything edible, they will find it. Even while we were sitting there doing some social media and putting our pack covers on, there was a currawong watching us, and before we'd even fully left the area, it was down on the ground looking at our packs. So again, it's always a good idea, even if it's not going to rain, to put your pack covers on and put your pack upside down so there's a limited access point into the pack itself. The walk out to Cape Hoy is probably the most physically demanding component of the whole trip. And when we got back, I did a search on the internet that if you're doing this walk from Fortescue Bay out to Cape Hoy, there are 4,500 steps. And when I say steps, it's not steps as in Fitbit tracking your how many steps you're doing. This is physical steps.
Lift your leg up.
And you walk out and you've got this bloody steep set of stairs that takes you down the bottom. And all I could think was, we're going to have to go back up here again.
Yeah.
Then you go back up to a not as high an area, then down, then back up again. So there are a lot of steps, but again, the views out from Cape Hoy are pretty good, well worth it. I think it took us all up the trip. As I said, the trip out to Cape Hoy and back was about 1 hour and 40. So it's a comfortable sort of trip with great views. The walk back, particularly up that last set of steps back towards where we dropped our pack, it's
a killer.
It's a killer,
It's
yeah.
a killer.
So that's the hardest section of the whole track from our perspective.
Yeah, and that's a shared track. So Tim mentioned before that those people who are doing the walk to Cape Hoy, day trippers who are parked at Fortescue Bay, they're coming up too, and they're pretty fresh and they're not carrying anything, so they're moving pretty quickly. But it gets quite busy. So another reason why I think it was good for us to get out early.
So basically, after a couple of hours, there were no facilities as far as to be able to purchase lunch at Fortescue Bay. I think it's a missed opportunity for someone to set up there. There really is.
They need a coffee van.
Yeah, a coffee van would make a fortune out there. So we had our lunch. We just sat in the picnic area along with most of the other hikers as they turned up, and just waited for our bus. Now, the bus stop is in front of the ranger's station, so we'd gone down to see where the bus was, and that's what the ranger told us. And we walked past the sign that said bus stop, but it didn't make sense as we walked in. An easy to locate sort of thing, and the bus trip back to Port Arthur is relatively quick and easy as well.
There is one though. I mean, there's a trailhead towards the bottom. Well, it's supposed to be at the end of the trail, but towards the bottom of the trail as you come into Fortescue Bay. Great opportunity for some photos, but then you have to walk
another 1.5 kilometres.
Well, it says 300 metres, but gee, it just seemed like a long way. It's like, are we there yet? Just prepare yourself for that one, because you get to the end of the trail and you go, yay, great celebration, take a photo and keep walking.
Yes. And from there we went back to Port Arthur, picked up our bag that we'd left there, grabbed some food, and we didn't have a long wait, and then we got a bus back to Hobart, so trip over. Now, a couple of things that I would mention here. The Tasmanian Parks website recommend you have a 50-litre pack on this trip. Just about everybody that was on our group had a 65-litre pack, and there could have been a couple of reasons for that. If you've only got one pack and you don't want to go out and buy another one, you'll use what you have. But just about everyone that had a 65-litre pack, the packs were...
Filled that pack.
Filled well and truly.
Now, that's okay if they want to carry all of that and they think it's essential and they want some luxuries and they've made those decisions. But we got the impression that everybody was pretty unhappy with the fact that they had full 65-litre packs and we didn't, so we kept getting questions about, how come your packs are so small? It's like, I've got to carry this thing around. It's like, yep. You might want to think about that next time.
Now, from my perspective, I was carrying using a 33-litre pack. Now, I would have liked a slightly bigger pack. I think for me, a 40-litre pack would have done really well, or 36 to 40 litres. But I carried everything I needed to. I carried food. I carried all my clothing. It wouldn't have been any different. Mm-hmm. The difference may have been if you have a cheaper and bulkier sleeping bag, that will certainly impact. And there were some pretty big sleeping bags being carried on that trip.
Yeah, there were. And I think likewise, I could have done with a 40-ish litre backpack.
So I think that the thing that I'd recommend is prepare your gear in advance, work out what it is you really do need. Now, certainly from my perspective, I can get away with a pretty small pack because I've done enough hiking that I know exactly what I use and don't use and what makes me comfortable. I could have carried bottles of wine, I could have carried all sorts of stuff and increased the size of the pack, but I was quite happy with what I had and I didn't starve.
Well, in fact, I was just saying, because it was Christmas, we took some extra goodies and, we didn't open some of our Christmas Day goodies until the last day. So we had plenty of food, probably way too much food. We didn't have to take any cooking implements or, so no stove or pots or bowls or those sorts of things. So, I think just bear that in mind. And if you don't want to carry the weight, then don't carry the weight.
But yeah, as I said, go through, prepare beforehand, put everything aside, revisit it again, work out if there's something you're going to use or not. So the only thing I think I didn't use was my long johns, just in case it got really cold, but pretty much everything else got used on the hike. So, it's up to you. If you want to carry it, that's fine. But as I said, if the Tasmanian Park Service are recommending a 50-litre pack, they tend to be on the conservative side. So, yeah, I think that it just means you need to really think about what it is you're carrying.
Yeah, and if you have a bigger pack, you don't have to fill it.
No.
That's the other thing. You can squish it up and, make it as small as you possibly can to fit the gear that you have. You don't have to fill it.
Now, the Tasmanian Parks website have a recommended packing list, but both Jill and I, if you go to the write-up, we have links to what we actually carried on that trip, and you can see whether it's something that is going to be helpful to you or not. And who knows, you might need a bigger pack, but really be conscious about choosing what you take with you, it'll make the whole trip much more enjoyable. While we're talking about packs, I'd suggest getting one of the ultralight sil nylon day packs, either from Osprey or Cedar Summit. These are things that weigh under 100 grams, fold down to virtually nothing, but it means when you do go out to Cape Pillar and the Blade, you've got something to put your snacks in and your water bottle and your rain gear if need be. You don't have to carry everything in your hands or be wearing it. So it's worth it. It's, as I said, it's not going to take up much space or add much weight, but I think it really would help.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would say is that if you're using bladders that fit inside your pack, having a collapsible bottle of some kind that you can fill with water for those day trips, that would be handy too. We improvised a bit and we filled our empty peanut butter jars up with water. We loaded up on water before we went off and topped up with our peanut butter jars along the way, and then came back and reloaded with water when we picked up our packs.
Okay, so that was our 4-day trip on the Tasmanian-based Three Capes walking track. As I said at the beginning, this trip over-delivered from my perspective, and as I said, it will go on a list of hikes that I want to revisit again at some stage. It really is a good hike. It's 48 kilometres. It's not long in relation to doing multi-day hikes from our perspective.
But don't be fooled like me. I just thought, 48 kilometres, what are we going to be doing? Like, we can cover 25, 30 in a day.
And that's one thing I will mention here is the Tasmanian Park Service don't want you doing that. Basically, you are staying at each hut in order. So again, they actually said if you want to do this in one day, it's not something we can offer, because it just means you're getting a concentration of people rather than spreading them out evenly along the track and having a good experience.
Well, I think it's more about the times they've allocated are quite reasonable times to enjoy being there and the opportunity to see what you need to see. So, and there are parts that's pretty tough. You're carrying a full pack and up those. I think if I never see another set of stairs again for a little while, that'd be very happy. Thank you.
So yeah, great trip. Can't recommend it enough. And I think it's one of those sort of trips we, from an experiential perspective, we rated this as a 5, which is pretty rare for us. It really is a trip that's well worth doing, whether you're a newer hiker or whether you're an experienced hiker.
And just one last point for me. The people that we met on this trail were just lovely people. So, very genuine. Out of the 33 that were heading in the same direction on the day that we were heading, I can honestly say there wasn't anybody that we thought that, was a bit weird or a bit unpleasant or, somebody that you wouldn't want to spend a bit of time chatting to. So that was a really nice thing about it as well. And, that made the communal living a little bit easier and a little bit more pleasant and enjoyable.
Does that mean it's us?
Oh, we're the I could be. Somebody said that. If you can't find the, I'll just call them an idiot in the group. Look in the mirror. No, it wasn't us.
But yeah, so we hope you've enjoyed this series of 3 podcasts. And if you're looking at this trail, we hope that provides a bit of additional information from both the podcasts as well as the write-up to help you plan your trip. That's all for us this week. Bye for now.
And bye from me.